We didn't tell you we're related. That was beautiful, Liz, and inspiring. You should be up here. This is absolutely wonderful. Well, it's a delight being here and to be part of it. And Bob and I have had a great time over the phone the last, Bob, 8 weeks? And he's exploited me mercilessly. I think this is one of 18 presentations. He gave me a raise last night, which is an extra glass of wine and 2 extra peanut skewers, and so he told me that was a raise. It is great to be here, not just to present, but to learn. And second, because I really adore Canada. I served for 10 years on the ICPC, International Crime Prevention Board in Montreal. And to hear your thoughts, all of this, because it's not just, as I say, the gospel according to Calhoun, but the learning. I always pick up more than I give. And just delighted last night to meet John, to meet this gentleman here, and Liz, of course, and Bob, and just the energy and commitment I feel here, which is just absolutely delicious, as you really are rolling up your intellectual, programmatic policy and existential sleeves to dive into this really, really tough problem. It's also a delight being here because I'm still standing at my age, and I'm here, and I know where I am. And I actually thought that, that it's about time I joined a health club, and I was partially inspired by my grandmother, who started walking 5 miles a day when she's 60. She's 97 now, and we don't know where she is. Another reason to jog was so I could hear heavy breathing again, and I joined a health club last year. I spent about $400, but I didn't lose any weight because they didn't tell you had to show up. And I did finally join, and I bent and I twisted and I jumped up and down and perspired for an hour, but by the time I got my leotard on, the class was over. And and be careful about reading health books. You may die of misprint. So I tried to retire a bit ago, and I was giving a lot of speeches, and in California I was giving one, and some folks from then Governor Schwarzenegger's office heard me and said, "You got to come up, and I want to pick your brain about some gang issues." And they seemed to like the initial ideas. Would I develop this into a strategy? Yes. Would I help raise funds for it? I did. Would I run it? I said, "Are you crazy? I live in Falls Church, Virginia, and I don't sleep on airplanes." And here I signed up, and I've been doing it for the last 7 years. And without money, by the way, that network is still going on. It's really extraordinary. They don't want to let each other go for a variety of reasons. Why did we do it? As Liz mentioned, you've got quite an issue here. Their increase in gang violence was strong. The victimization not only of kids, but of communities, which the community fabric gets torn apart. And citizens can't be citizens. You can't come out and coach. You can't come out and kids can't play on the street. And to get in front of the issue before fear dominates our public policy discussion. And that was huge in the 90s. And we locked up half the universe as a result. Cities struggling with this issue alone and needing to pool pain as well as progress and promise. And opportunities to get beyond individual program responses to a more holistic communitarian response. To get into the deeper issues of family support, preschool education, and a little bit about what Bob was talking about, the mentoring, the coaching, the summer programs. So we aim to reduce gang violence and help build communities that don't produce gang violence. To create a local network, to create a statewide network, to determine as best we could what works, what doesn't, and to advocate for state and federal policies, which we have done. we've seen the promise and the pain in each of our California cities, working the tough streets, trying to persuade somewhat skeptical, fractious city councils, stressing prevention and intervention at a time when citizens are tired and say, don't give me this family stuff, don't give me this mentoring stuff, get these thugs off the street. Media clamoring for quick results. It's not easy. But after X number of years, close to 7, and then Attorney General Eric Holder picked it up and cloned it, and I have been a consultant to him, knee-deep in getting it started in 10 cities. I'd love to say I'm an advisor to Obama, Liz, but I do show up at the White House occasion, and I don't have a call with him today, so this is... Anyway, we've come up with really kind of extrapolated over the years 8 what I would call building blocks that if these are in place, you really have a very good chance of changing things. First, the mayor or the city leader and police are together leading on 3 levels: moral, conceptual, and bureaucratic. Moral. The mayor of San Bernardino flipped burgers, cooked hot dogs on a grill on the roughest corner in San Bernardino. Getting to know. You're Liz, you live here, you have kids, did it for 6 weeks in a row. I'm your mayor, I care. His outrage started when a young girl, Manisha Crenshaw, was killed by a stray bullet at Thanksgiving. She was sitting there about to eat, and a stray bullet killed her. He said, my city will not tolerate this, it will stop. And he identified the city's most gang-infested, crime-infested 20-block area and said, we're going to turn it around. So that was the moral commitment. The conceptual part was helping to craft a citywide plan, and on the bureaucratic front, he made changes, and a lot of them, such as police patrolling with child welfare and zoning, so that if there was a bust in a family, child welfare was there to deal with the siblings. So in that Operation Phoenix area, in that area alone, crime dropped more than 50%. Interesting, the measure that was used was also a civic measure where one citizen said, being here, all you wanted to do was move. He said, now my kids can play in the street. All I wanted to do before was to get out. I want to stay. Second, and this is really key, law enforcement and human services must see each other as essential partners. Where there is mutual caricature, it doesn't work. Where cops might say to the service community, you're bleeding hearts, you're soft-headed, and vis-a-vis human services, cops are tough guys, they like to arrest, they're an occupying force. In that case, it does not work. Folks, it's parental, right? As parents, we set limits, we nurture. It's both. And it really makes me furious that when families collapse, neighborhoods weaken, schools fail to educate, and the workforce fails to produce jobs, we say to the cops, rescue us. Now, come on. It's a community-wide issue. Abraham Heschel, one of the leading theologians of the 20th century, said in his book, Moral Grandeur and Spiritual Audacity, in regards to cruelties committed in a free society, some are responsible. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. Isn't that beautiful? Some are guilty, but all are responsible. The blame game is the cheapest game, friends. It's a way of avoiding responsibility, of avoiding work. We all have roles to play, and it's part of our core work to convince people that they can and must play a part. Parents, civic associations, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, the city, hospitals, schools, and more. Roles differ, but the undergirding community values should not. Cops patrol and arrest, their role, but they can and do argue passionately for prevention. Quite frankly, some of the most persuasive voices in the states for prevention have been the enforcement community. Say, oh, we'll arrest and we'll jail, but you know what? We cannot keep doing this. We need the recreation programs. We need the mentoring programs. You're just going to wear us out. And those running prevention and intervention programs should refuse to tolerate unacceptable behavior like kids packing guns or stuff like this. We can inculcate both. We can do it. As a microcosm, almost a parable, I was in a hearing in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and this is a situation where some community voices talk to potentially returning offenders. And this woman, short woman, grandma, was talking to a tough-looking offender who wanted to come back into the community. And she said, "You're the reason I can't shop. You're the reason I can't rock on my front porch. You're the reason my grandson can't ride his tricycle. And if you so much as sneeze the wrong way, I'm reporting you and you're going back." But at the same time, she was writing her name and telephone number down, which she tore off, and she handed it to him, and she said, "But call me anytime, day or night. If you feel you're in trouble, I'm here for you." So it was really both. She was a microcosm of both. Third, a staffer or a point person with dedicated time to help with the planning, the data collection, and the implementation of what I will describe next, which is a citywide plan that blends prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry. Single interventions can do some good stuff, but if they're not connected with an overall strategy, it just gets really difficult. And each of these interventions carries simply too much weight. And if it's a collective response across the board, then you're really beginning to dig deeper, and it becomes a social norm issue, that we are really here to change the social norm. We must move in a coordinated way on all fronts. We tend to be, at least in the States, pretty strong in the enforcement arena. But the prevention plank is absolutely essential, whether it's family support, early childhood education, dealing with, and John and I were speaking about this last night, fetal alcohol syndrome and how that plays out. It's critical. And then the intervention work, the mentoring, the recreation, the school-to-work programs, all of that. And the prevention, just a side riff on that, is really hard to get into the citywide plan, again, because of the impatience and the worry of the public. Citizens trying to get to work, trying to get their kids to school, saying, please, that stuff takes too long to see the results. Anyway, some comprehensive plans started with enforcement. I'll give you San Jose, which is a city of about 1 million. Its first framing was Project Neighborhood Crackdown. It evolved into Reclaiming Our Youth, and its latest iteration is Action, Collaboration, and Transformation. And let me be careful not to put enforcement into a box. In Boston, some of the most innovative changes, community-wide changes, came from the Boston Police Department. Ceasefire, Operation Homefront, Operation Nightlight, and Safe Streets. One little vignette from Boston where a cop and the faith community were patrolling at night, so you had two different versions of authority, one the sort of the legal and the other ordained. And their job is to go at night to families to visit kids who are particularly troubled and causing a lot of trouble. And at midnight, they went to a third-story walk up in Dorchester, and they sat down with the family and the kid, pretty gruff kid, pretty angry kid, unrepentant kid, tough kid. And they walked out, snowy night in Boston, and the minister turned to the cop and said, "This kid needs to be pulled off the street, arrested in due time." And the cop said, "I think he needs a mentor." My point is, roles can change. The issue of school retention is huge, both as a prevention and an intervention strategy. In the research in the States, at least, and I think it's certainly here, kids begin to pull away at second and third grade. Not necessarily truancy, but chronic absenteeism. And you've got to intervene. And many of the cities in California have looked hard at third grade interventions. And that also necessitates mental health interventions, because a lot of these kids come from early trauma. And I knew this. I mean, I always did fairly well in school, but before my first failed retirement, I decided to write a book. And it would be good if I had some computer skills. And I sat there, being ancient myself, looking at this box. And the teacher said, "Go to the toolbar." Well, my first reflex was to look on the floor for a wrench. And then she said, "You'll have to delete that." And I looked for some whiteout. I don't know. I was the only one putting whiteout on the screen. And I don't know how many of you in this room remember whiteout. But anyway, but it was really interesting. It's humorous, but on the other hand, that class was not fun. And, people would be on page 87. I was still looking for my toolbox. I was on page 6. And you can see early on with these kids, whether dyslexia, the fetal alcohol syndrome, school becomes a source of torture. And it becomes a source of "I don't belong." And of course, underneath all of this, for these kids with whom you're dealing and who are pushing your statistics, is a colossal sense of disconnection from family, from neighborhood, from school, from hope. So schooling is a key piece on this as part of citywide strategy. So each of these plans for the cities, and I'm going to leave, Bob, I'm going to leave you one of the plans. I brought it along with me. Since you overpaid me, I thought I'd leave some stuff. And it really describes in depth this plan with the principles. And I don't leave this with you as prescriptive and saying here is the Holy Grail. It's just a wonderful framework to see how this stuff plays out. And it is tough to be a 17-year-old kid in America, especially if you're black and brown and you're poor. The guy messes with me, he said, "One kid, I have to mess with them. I can't afford to let anybody mess with me." I was in Philadelphia on a site visit a couple of months ago, and we met in a library, and they had me running a little parents group. And this one mom, who can't remember the last time she had her birthday celebrated, said, "My goal in life is to get my kids to school and back safely." I just couldn't believe it. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, kids are shot a lot. There are gangs out there." And she said, "We walk up the street, and usually there's a little memorial for a kid who's been killed, and occasionally we walk on some pavements where there's dried blood." And there was a father in my group, which is unusual, given the rate of absent fathers. And it was in a library, and his kid, who was 10 or 11, was tutoring his sister, who was about 8. It was really lovely to watch. And the father was there. And we reflected on this, and I remarked on what his son was doing and the gentleness and the exchange. And he said this. He said, I know, and he's a really good student, but I've got to teach him to use his hands. I said, what are you talking about? He said he's going to get jumped pretty soon, and if he doesn't know how to use his hands, he's in trouble. He said, so I box with him. So this is a quote from the Atlantic magazine. I can't tell them don't fight. It's not realistic in their world. It's not necessarily the pop culture to Chief Keef to video games. It's because these kids don't have adult men in their lives available to show them how it's done. The media dreck is much less important than the ways youth observe adult men in their lives and how they treat women. Powerful stuff. So, and another note about the plan. It's got to be jointly developed and owned and committed to by others. In one of California network cities that I won't name, but it does have trolleys and hills and overlooks a bay. The plan was written by a very erudite professor from Berkeley. It was brilliant. It was long. It was Tolstoyan in length. I think it's being used as a doorstop now. But nobody participated in it. It was brilliant, but it wasn't owned by anybody. These plans, police have to be involved. The faith community has to be involved. Schools, social services, et cetera, et cetera. And as part of the process, Salinas, which was one of our toughest cities, with a real split between the agricultural community and the wealthy landowners, would go to the community and do community forums, getting from the community their voices, their thoughts about what they were worried about and what they could do. And then, when pieces of it came into the plan, they went back into the community and said, we listened. This piece is in, this piece is in. And it wasn't just poor, benighted community, how awful it is. It is awful, but what are you going to do? What can we count on you to do as a neighbor, as a parent, as a friend? Again, when people are scared, they will turn to law enforcement. But when a horrible event occurs, we have to redouble our efforts in all of those areas. If the plan is frail and the city is not together, when tough stuff happens, the other elements collapse and everybody turns to law enforcement. Where this plan is healthy and going and owned, there can be a tough incident, there can be a bad incident, but the commitment remains. The other piece is there's a pragmatic dimension to it. A plan can attract resources. In every one of these cities with a robust plan, money has come in, either state or federal, county, and private foundations. And 4 of the cities have actually taxed themselves. Very modest tax. It's interesting to reflect how these taxes got through. When it was framed as enforcement, it didn't get through. When it was framed as prevention, it didn't get through. But it was framed in public safety with a chunk of the money for police, fire, and prevention. It passed in all 4 cities. And that gave a flexible pool of money, about, in one small city, about $7 million, which is not a small amount of money. Next, number 5, is access to and use of a wide variety of data sources. This sounds really boring. But if the only available data I have about a kid is law enforcement data, that's going to be my lens. And again, John and I were talking about this last night. If I don't know about early child abuse, if I don't know about early alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome, I'm going to only look at this kid as a package of trouble. So we've got to know more about who these kids are. Now, we have a lot of laws in our country which would restrict the sharing of data, which are important. But in smaller communities, you usually knew about these kids, who they were. One way to get the data sharing going on in these cities is they will have a policy team, school superintendent, but then they will have what they call a tech team or a worker bee team. And on that worker bee team would be, let's say, Liz, some folks from your office, police, a teacher, a faith community person. So you all are pooling information about kids and families you know. So that means that if a teacher in a school is seeing something going on with a kid who's angry and sees stuff bubbling up, they can call a police officer and say, Bob, I think something's going down this afternoon. Or vice versa, if a cop busts a kid's father and says, your student this morning is going to be held to pay because we just took the father out of the family. We have got to find ways to share information about children, or we're going to wind up just boxing them in slots. In Boston, they've done a great job of this and find that X number of families wind up having 7 or 8 workers and not knowing each other. You're going in that family too? I just arrested. Mental health's going in there too. Child welfare's going in there. After a while, the family is really convinced that they are totally pathological. And so ways have to be found to share information. It's not information. It has to do with the dignity of the person, really, and a holistic view of who they are. Sixth, a mechanism or an entity. Mechanism is such a lousy word. Some entity that keeps an eye on the plan. The Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force in San Jose, same name for Santa Rosa. The Office of Community Safety in Chicago. Operation Safe Community in Memphis. In Salinas, it's the Community Alliance for Safety and Peace. And where this does well, they will review the plan every 2 months. And it's an open meeting, so it's highly accountable. Citizens come in. And they'll look, okay, you, the faith community, said you promised 300 mentors for school-phobic third graders. How are we doing? You, the school, said you would open 2 after-school programs. How are we doing? You, the Chamber of Commerce, promised 400 summer jobs. How are we doing? So it's very much, it's highly accountable. In the cities where it sags, Oakland, for instance, had a very good plan, but they've lost staffing. The mayor and the chief don't get along, so things have really sagged. And it's devolved from an overall mosaic to individual mosaic tiles. It's really fallen apart. Seventh, and this is really key, and I think this is the piece to which Liz was referring in her opening comments about me, is the relational. That is usually regarded by people as the soft stuff. Well, friends, the soft stuff is the hardest stuff. All of us have been in a relationship, and every one of us has, whether as a child or a parent or a spouse or an ex-spouse, an employer, an employee, know that the relational is the hardest of the hard work. The willingness to forge a relationship with a kid who is dying, literally dying for a relationship, wants you to get close, but is at the same time, this child wants to keep you at arm's length. Because if you get closer, this kid is afraid that you will see garbage and reject him or her as everybody else has. When I was Commissioner of Youth Services in Massachusetts, I'll never forget a young offender, actually a murderer, who said to me, "Commissioner, I'd rather be wanted for murder than not wanted at all." Aaron Jacoba drove this point home to me. I had started a program called Youth as Resources when I headed the National Crime Prevention Council. And the thesis was, we got to bring these kids in, not just as object of our concern and curing, but hey, we need you. You're part of us. Even if you're wounded, even if you're one of the wounders. And these kids would get mini grants. They'd design the project and they'd run them, and you could fill these walls with the program. There's not a single issue they didn't deal with. Homelessness, housing, child abuse, teen pregnancy, on and on and on. Would it work with kids who were really marginalized, even kids who had served time? We started a program at the Indiana Girls School, and you have to do a lot as a young woman in Indiana to get locked up. 4 girls would go into an institution for kids who had terminal cerebral palsy. So the kids from the correctional institution would go and work and just be with these other kids. Now, at my first failed retirement, Erin Jacoba keynoted. Little Erin, about the same height as my daughter-in-law, barely 5 feet, who eventually, by the way, got a master's degree in social work, turned to me and said, Jack, when I came into the institution to work with kids, they would fling out their arms to welcome me. It's the only time in my life I can remember anyone calling my name positively. And I thought, where has her name been? Where has her name been? Truancy list, stubborn children list, police blotters, court dockets, prison intake forms. And I thought, how many kids out there are anomic, without name, or who can't stand their names? Who names them? Who claims them? Wonderful quote, which is not only incredible theology, but to me the core of social policy from Isaiah, "Hear, O Israel, I've called thee by name, thou art mine." What kid can say, I am claimed? Who is claiming me? Families, which do well, do. Church does it in baptism. They also, will often walk the child down the aisle and say, welcome Sarah, welcome Tom, welcome John, welcome Liz. The Islamic naming ceremony is huge. The Jewish naming ceremony is huge. But if we don't name our kids, the Kens and the Jacks, the Pauls and the Toms, and the Bobs will become Ratman, Highboy, Needle, Shooter, which are real names from the LA gang files. My point is they will be renamed and they will be claimed. One program, one element of these cities' comprehensive plans, it seems to be consistent in almost every city, is to hire as street workers guys who have done time. And they've shown that they're clean, usually 5 years, and they get some training. But these are guys who want to give back. They don't want some of the kids to take the path they took, or it may be deeper, maybe atonement for what they did. And I wanted to get a taste of how these street workers did their work. So I'm in a car in Oakland, near the Coliseum, rough spot. I'm with Billy Dukes and Jay Jimenez. And we back and forth. It's about midnight. I said, do I have the right clothes for gang wear? Man, you don't have the right clothes. You got to get some new threads, man. You don't have the right threads. And they asked me what I drove, and I told them I drove a Subaru. I said, man, a Subaru? You got to get a low rider. You got to get a low rider with some real teeth. And I said, okay, guys, if you are so good, if you are so wonderful, and you're pulling up to Bob on the corner with his boys, what's the first thing you say? What's the first thing you say? Without a nanosecond's reply, Jay said, hey, loved one. I said, what? He said, hey, loved one, or hey, nephew. Think about it. It was the language of claim, of family, of embrace. Homeboy, homie, family, home. A few months later, I served as keynoter at the Massachusetts Human Services Conference, and it was full of providers, wonderful people who were doing the psychiatric care, the drug abuse counseling, the clinical services, domestic violence, child abuse work, recreation, boys and girls clubs, and I commended them. You're the best, I said. But where do we begin? Do we begin with the youth at the other end of our clinical scalpels to begin with the delinquency? Or do we say, hey, loved one, let's work on the delinquency? Where do we start? What's our initial framing? Now, I'm not implying that all these kids are angels waiting discovery and release. Some wrecking havoc in neighborhoods or schools have got to be taken off the streets and fast. They shouldn't be allowed to tear up families or communities. Still, it matters how we start. I have called thee by name. This really came home to me in a second setting, and this is really a powerful vignette. There's a program, and Bob, I commend you look at it. You may know of it already. Some call it ceasefire. Others call it call-ins. And what it is the shot callers, or the heavy-duty offenders in a community, usually on parole, or have been arrested so many times they're on the edge of going to prison, are called in. And the invitation is a really heavy invitation, usually from the local U.S. attorney and the police chief. And it's a drama. And the rap sheets of the guys and their pictures are on the wall. We know who you are. That's the other half, I guess. I've called you by name. I also know you. Here are your 36 offenses. And your buddy, who did the same thing, is now serving 25 years at Leavenworth. So they'll get the folks who are really tearing up communities, pictures on the wall. Law enforcement's on one side, and human services on the other. And law enforcement reads them the riot act. You've done this, you've done this, you've done... If you so much as jaywalk, you're doing time, and it's heavy time. But please, please, we need to keep you in the community. We don't want to send you away. Listen to these folks. And they'll stand up. Drug abuse counseling, mental health counseling, job training, GED. You have GED here. The high school exams, if you drop out, faith community, et cetera, et cetera. Then, and this is the real drama, you have the moral voice of the community. Somebody from the community who has been hurt by this. I mean, you get the local voice. You just don't get the clinical voice. You don't get the law enforcement voice. So here's law enforcement. Here's the human service community. I'm at the bottom of the oval here, facing that way. And in front of me, sitting here, are about 10 offenders. And right in back of me is a really big guy, dreadlocks, heavily tatted guy. So I'm about, I don't know, 3 feet away from him. Kathy Jenkins comes out, little Kathy Jenkins, with a sign, a placard around his neck, her nephew who has been shot and killed. And she said, I speak for someone who has no voice. And she looked at these guys and she called them all princes. You are princes of men who have a choice to make. She walks up, she's right in front of me, right? I see her face, and the offender's back. I'm looking over his back. She gets up into his face and says, son, tell me your name. And he flexes big time, tats ripple. He said, Popeye. And she got even closer and said, son, that's not what your mama called you. What did your mama call you? He shrank, and he barely whispered his name, Kevin. And so I thought, where has his name been? Why did it get so sullied? Where were we at a time when Kevin's name was being torn apart. Now, a lot of the relational work, a lot of that street work, a lot of that heavy evening work is done by the faith community, and they're not proselytizing, because proselytizing can really be dangerous, as we know, and not particularly legal. And it reminds me of 3 chaplains, part of the faith community up in the northern Midwest, who felt that working with college students was really fairly light duty, that if they were really good at their faith and really committed, they would try and convert a bear. And so the 3 chaplains decided to go out and try and convert a bear, and they planned to meet a week later in the local hospital. First was Father Flannery, Catholic, who had his arm in a sling and he was on crutches, and he said, you know, I went out there and I found the bear and I read him from the catechism. He hated the catechism. He slapped me around, he knocked me down, and then I sprinkled holy water on him. Holy Mother of God, he's going to be baptized next week. And then they turned to Billy Bob. Billy Bob said he's an evangelical. He said, I don't believe in that sprinkle stuff. I don't believe in that. I believe in the book, the word of the Lord. I found that bear. Bear didn't like what I had to say. I wrestled him up the hill, down the hill, up the hill, down the hill. We wound up in a pond. I dunked him 3 times. He came up praising Jesus. I turned to Rabbi Greenstein, who was lying on a bed, 2 broken arms, 2 broken legs, IVs, and he looked up weakly and he said, I knew I shouldn't have started with circumcision. So the faith stuff could be dangerous. How much time do I have, Bob? Where did Bob go? I think I'll do 2 more pieces. I know we want a panel, and I really want to hear their thoughts, not only on this, but what they're doing. One is just very quickly on the youth. Those were the key points, and I'm going to do one more on the gun issue in this, which is so unique, so horribly unique to us, and thank God you've got your strict gun laws here. Is in looking at teens, we have to be aware, I think, of the resiliency issues. And I'm just going to tick off a few very, very quickly. And most of you who work with kids know this. The Search Institute in Minnesota lists 42. I boil them down to 5 or 6. 1 is a sense of safety. 2 is locus of control, which is a fancy way of saying, I'm not blown around willy-nilly. I've got a goal, whether it's to make the football team or to go to college, whatever, I've got a goal. 3, a skill that I can point to. I can shoot hoops, I can sing, I can lead a meeting, I can make people laugh, whatever it is. 4th is an adult who is always there no matter what. Teacher, coach, mentor, uncle, aunt. As one youth worker in Los Angeles told me, we must convince these kids they're loved before we can learn them. You know, if they don't feel like they're worth anything, you can dump all this education and it's just going to go right through a sieve. I don't feel like. 5th is optimism, either defined in a theological way, I'm held in his hands, or I have hope. It's that simple. It reminds me of a joke about a kid playing Little League baseball, and he's jumping up and down on second base, clearly very happy, and an adult comes along and says, you're happy, you must be winning. He said, no, we're losing 42-0. I said, why are you so happy? He said, we haven't been up to bat yet. So, optimism. And finally, altruism, which is a sense of the other, that I have something to give others. And I really feel that under all our work is the deep challenge to connect the disconnected. Violent crime is a rupture in the social contract. And so much crime and violence stems from disconnection from that which shapes us: family, neighborhood, school, and a sense of future. And as we think about that as a paradigm, disconnection, we might want to think about ways that our clients, quote, clients, can give back. Those in the criminal justice system, the obvious is restitution, which is very, very important, I think, because it's two messages. One, you're responsible. You're responsible. Two, the implicit message, you have something of worth that somebody needs. You can make. But why not for a kid in foster care who can do X or Y? I think there's a lot we should think about in that regard. There is some research, Tony Earls at Harvard, who's looked at neighborhoods in Chicago that by all means should be full of crime and violence and difficulty, but aren't. The anomalies. And what he's largely found is, I care about John and his kids, he cares about mine, and we're all involved a little bit civically in some way. So communities, the fancy term for it is collective efficacy, which is really academic BS. All it means is mutual caring and investment in the community. And everybody can do something. Have dinner with my child, clean up my neighborhood, mentor a child, et cetera, et cetera. The number 8 piece, and I know I'm running out of time here, is the environmental piece having to do with food, what they eat, what's available, over-concentration of liquor stores, and in our country, guns. And it's a national disgrace. It's an absolute national disgrace. I found myself on the picket line in Washington for the first time since my civil rights days. And I have to tell you, if you picket at my age, you're not going to know a couple of things. One, wear long underwear. Two, know where the porta potties are. That's very, very key. And three, make sure you know where you are, you know. And don't expect to walk for a day after that. But, you know, our crime rates are very similar to yours, or actually they're a little bit lower in many of the, until you throw in guns, and then we go through the roof. The irony is we protect ourselves so well. Spinach was recalled because 2 people died and a number of people got sick. It was recalled. Cars, registration, drugs removed, thalidomides removed, on and on and on, seatbelts, smoking. A kid was arrested, an 8-year-old kid, in a town in Virginia because he used his fingers as a toy gun, and he was suspended for a month. Tell that to the NRA. It is unbelievable. And I'm not going to say much about this. I'm going to talk about it tomorrow night. But the events in Newtown, Connecticut have created a sea change in our nation. For the first time in my lifetime, I am seeing that we have hope to change some of this stuff. And trying to parse why. One, Obama. He mentioned it in his State of the Union speech. And he was absolutely passionate about it. We have the groups that have been out there, the Brady campaign, the Mayors Against Illegal, by the way, Bloomberg's Mayors Against Illegal Guns started with something like 20 mayors. They have 800 mayors signed on. So they're those folks. We've got the mental health community, and there's a lot of mental health attention to this issue, which is really important. But the right likes that because they say, oh, these people are just sick. So they won't do anything about the instruments of violence, but they'll come down heavily on the treatment stuff. Yes, the recent shooters were loners, but most of the shooting doesn't. People break. Spouses shoot spouses. A fired employee shoots an employer. And it depends dramatically if what's at hand is a stick or a knife or a gun, when a normal person breaks. Huge. So yes, it's important we have the mental health discussion. There's some state laws coming up, California being one, New Jersey another, to not only ban weapons, but to tax ammunition, and the revenue from that will go for mental health services in schools. So you see it on the national level, you see it on the state level, which is extraordinary, and you see it on the community level, where some towns are saying in some of the crazy states that have open carry laws, they can wander around armed to the teeth, you can't have a gun here. You can't have a gun in church. Well, it's beginning to make the NRA insane because they got a lot of law, because they're going to go after them. They're going to sue these folks, saying, oh, you've denied us our constitutional right to carry a weapon. Stevie Wonder, by the way, who spoke or who was helping to entertain at the inaugural, said, you know, I can walk in, and you know Stevie Wonder, right? Blind. He can get a gun. So maybe we should require all blind people to have guns, and that might really scare the NRA. You know, so we're seeing it from the street, and I'm involved in a little neighborhood group. Actually, it was the Obama group, a lot of retirees, really smart people who can do charts and analyze voting trends in neighborhoods and houses. And they're doing petition drives. They're setting up out in front of grocery stores. They're setting out in front of libraries. And I mean, it's the old door-to-door stuff. Also, at their monthly meetings, they serve good wine. So it's, you know, it's a good place to be. Anyway, I think, and I'm going to wind up very, very quickly, Bob. There's some resistance, and it is strong. And my theory is it stems from fear that the country is changing. Immigration, new faces, new colors, new things we wear in our head. And the era of the good old boy macho culture is waning. And when I was on that picket line, you know, I wasn't angry, I was sad. Because most of these folks, I think I saw 3 women, I think I saw 2 blacks at the gun show that I was picketing. And there were 25 of us who were picketing. There were 5,000. It was after Newtown. Everybody thought their guns were going to be taken away. The gun show set a record. This is 2 weeks after Newtown. Gun show in Chantilly, Virginia was packed. And a lot of these guys had Army caps or Marine, they had served our country. And so it really affected me. We got a lot of heat. You know, commie, pinko, some really old words, and also a guy that showed a picture of a semi-automatic, and he said, I'm going to set it up right here. But I see changes, some real changes, and the Greeks have 2 words for time. One is chronos, which means about 25 of, and it also means that I've overstayed my time. The other is kairos, which is, wasn't that a time? Wasn't that a great time we had? Wasn't that a time in history? And I think it's kairos time in our country regarding guns. Federal agency commitment of the Obama White House, emerging commitments from state and local governments and of community groups across the country. The gun issue is unique to us. You have environmental issues too. And I'm not going to let it go either. One day I close with words from George Bernard Shaw, who said, the true joy in life is to be used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a right one, being a force of nature as opposed to a feverish, little, selfish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. He concludes, I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a splendid torch which I've got a hold of for a moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. Thank you very much. Keep up your wonderful work. Wonderful work. Thank you. Thank you.